Hey everybody, and welcome back to another video from Northeast Christian Apologetics. I am Simon Williams, and today you are watching a live stream that we do every Monday evening at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We are continuing with our read of The Reason for God by Tim Keller. I hope that everyone had a great 4th of July. My 4th of July was fun. I got to play Mario Party with my family online. That was pretty fun for me, maybe too fun. But now we are diving into The Reason for God. We're going to continue our reading of it. And just as a reminder, as always, this book was written by Tim Keller. Passed away last year, but his ministry, Gospel and Life, is still available with his sermons and with his insights. Highly recommend checking them out. You can get this book yourself. Remember that this is kind of like a follow-along kind of book study. I recommend you getting this book and putting it in your library, making it your own, making highlights, making notes in the book. If you're doing the Kindle version, you can make many notes. If not, and if the paperback version is your style, kind of like what I got this one, as in addition to the Kindle version, obviously. But and this one also comes with the Prodigal God. Very good insights from Tim Keller in this book. But if you have a paperback version, then you can put some notes in the margin. So you can get this book at Amazon.com, as well as, oops, not that one. Yep, don't forget to subscribe. But also ChristianBooks.com. All right, so ChristianBooks.com, Amazon.com, things like that. If you'd like to listen to the book being read without my insights or my opinions on the matter, or without my stumbling over words, then I highly recommend getting the Audible version of the book. Okay, so last week we finished part 1 of the book, and now we're going to be moving on to part 2, but in between part 1 and part 2, there's an intermission. And last week I asked if we should do the intermission. I was leaning towards doing the intermission, and I've decided that we will go ahead and read the intermission because I want this to be like a playlist that people can listen through while they're like doing work in the back, listen to it in the background and doing work. And part 1 of this book deals with addressing reasons for rejecting Christianity and explaining why they are not sufficient for rejecting Christianity. And so Dr. Keller goes through like the problem of evil, religious pluralism, Christianity being against science and things of that nature, being irrational. And he just dismantles them all pretty effectively and in a different way than like other philosophers do. But in the second part of the book, he's going to be arguing for Christianity. And this little intermission, I think, is a nice little transition. So he starts transitioning from arguments against Christianity to arguments for Christianity. And so if anybody's reading or watching this playlist, like in the background, they have this intermission in order to kind of understand where we were and where we are going. So I think it'll be pretty effective. I think it's useful. I think there's useful information in here. There are things that we've covered previously, but there's also teasers for what we're going to be covering in the following weeks. We do still have, let's see here, there's 14 chapters in this book, so we still do have, all right, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4. We still have 7 chapters to go. And so we it's going to be pretty soon here that we're going to be moving on to a new book. And if you have any suggestions on any book that you would like to read or do a study on, let me know. And just as a reminder, I'm still going through the study of Christian Apologetics by Douglas Groheis. Those videos are coming out on Tuesdays. And also we are going through the character of Jesus on Thursdays. And I find that book to be very, very helpful. If you are a follower of Christ and a disciple of Christ, then your major goal in life is to become more like him. You're his disciple, and so you want to learn to be like him. And that book provides insights on his character that is useful for us to learn from. So I recommend checking it out. But let's go ahead and head on over to the reading. All right, so intermission. All right, so Timothy Keller starts us off with scripture, Isaiah 1:18. Come, let us argue it out. Usually this is rendered, come, let us reason. But, argue it out is as good. All right, so intermission means literally to be between journeys or missions. That is where we are now. Underlying all doubts about Christianity are alternate beliefs, unprovable assumptions about the nature of things. So far, I've examined the beliefs beneath the 7 biggest objections or doubts people in our culture have about the Christian faith. I respect much of the reason behind them, but in the end, I don't believe any of them make the truth of Christianity impossible or even improbable. We have another journey to take, however. It is one thing to argue that there are no sufficient reasons for disbelieving Christianity. It is another to argue that there are sufficient reasons for believing it. That is what I try to do in the last part of this volume. Wait, someone should ask. You are going to give us sufficient grounds for believing Christianity? How do you define Christianity? How do you define sufficient? Let's take these questions in order. All right, so this is going to be really important. All right, so defining Christianity. We've recently gone through the Christian worldview in Dr. Groheist's book, the Christian Apologetics. The last chapter that just posted is about distortions of the Christian worldview, but before that was the Christian worldview itself. And so this is going to be kind of like a recap if you've watched those videos. But sufficient is going to be really important too. All right. And when people talk about sufficient, they usually mean like it's enough to for someone to, like, with regard to beliefs, the word sufficient usually, some people mistake this. All right. So some people think that sufficient with regard to beliefs is talking about sufficient, or you have enough evidence to compel belief, or that it would be irrational to disbelieve. But that's not correct. When we're talking about sufficiency, when you have sufficient evidence for belief, that means that it could be one of two things. It could be that you bear culpability for your lack of belief in any particular proposition. So if there is a sufficient evidence to warrant belief in something, then you have been exposed to that evidence and you still don't form belief, then the reason why you haven't formed belief is because you're culpable for not forming that belief. Another way is that sufficiency is with regard to reasonable inference. So you can reasonably infer that a proposition is true. So that's what I'm pretty sure that I can't quite remember where Keller goes with this, but I'm pretty sure that that's the route that he goes. When you have sufficient, it's reasonable to infer the proposition. Okay. All right. So let's take these questions in order. First, Christianity. Which Christianity? From the outside, the various Christian churches and traditions can look extremely different, almost like distinct religions. This is partially because the public worship services look so different. It is also because, as I said in chapter 3, Christianity is the faith that is most spread across the cultures and regions of the world. Therefore, it has assumed an enormous number of different cultural forms. Another reason that Christians look so different from one another is the great theological rifts that have occurred over the centuries. The first great division was between the Eastern Greek and Western Roman Church in the 11th century. Today, these are known as the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches. All right, so that happened at around like 11 AD. All right, and then the second great schism was within the Western Church between Roman Catholicism and Protestantism. All right, all Christians who take truth and doctrine seriously will agree that these differences between churches are highly significant. They make a major difference in how one's faith is held and practiced. Nevertheless, all Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant Christians assent together to great creeds of the first 1,000 years of church history, such as the Apostles', Nicene, Chalcedonian, and Athanasian creeds. In these creeds, the fundamental Christian view of reality is laid out. There is the classical expression of the Christian understanding of God as three in one. Belief in the Trinity creates a profoundly different view of the world from that of polytheists, non-Trinitarian monotheists, and atheists. Excuse me, as I will show in chapter 13. There is also a strong statement of the full deity and humanity of Jesus Christ in these creeds. Christians, therefore, do not look upon Jesus as one more teacher or prophet, but as Savior of the world. These teachings make Christians far more like than unlike one another. And so, like, this is really important to understand, okay? The creeds and the councils in the first 1,000 years of Christendom, they were meant to establish like boundaries for belief. All right, so they aren't intended to tell you exactly what to believe, but give you a field in which you can hold certain kinds of nuanced beliefs and still be within orthodoxy, okay? But within that field, people collect in certain groups. So they're all still orthodox, but they kind of collect together saying like, okay, this person has a model of the Trinity that I find particularly appealing or compelling. And so they follow that kind of branch. Or with regard to salvation or the importance of like faith, or how do you understand salvation through faith and works and things of that nature. You're given a field in which you can be a part of, and that's where the denominations come in, especially with regard to Protestantism, because Protestantism isn't quite as outlined out as like Eastern Orthodox as well as Catholicism. All right. So there's a lot more liberty to be had within Protestantism. Okay, so Keller continues, what is Christianity? For our purposes, I'll define Christianity as the body of believers who assent to these great ecumenical creeds. They believe that the triune God created the world, that humanity has fallen into sin and evil, that God has returned to rescue us in Jesus Christ, that in his death and resurrection, Jesus accomplished our salvation for us so we can be received by grace, that he established the church, his people, as the vehicle through which he continues his mission of rescue, reconciliation, and salvation, and that at the end of time, Jesus will return to renew the heavens and the earth, removing all evil, injustice, sin, and death from the world. So even though you're going to find that there's a ton of denominations, 99% of the denominations will all agree with that. And this is really like the core of Christianity. All right, so Keller continues. All Christians believe all this, but no Christians believe just this. As soon as you ask, how does the church act as a vehicle for Jesus' work in the world? And how does Jesus' death accomplish our salvation? And how are we received by grace? Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant Christians will give you different answers. Despite the claims of many to be such, there are no truly generic, non-denominational Christians. Everyone has to answer these how questions in order to live a Christian life. And those answers immediately put you into one tradition and denomination or another. It is important for readers to understand this. I am making a case in this book for the truth of Christianity in general, not for one particular strand of it. Some sharp-eyed Presbyterian readers will notice that I am staying quiet about some of my particular theological beliefs in the interest of doing everything I can to represent all Christians. Yet when I come to describe the Christian gospel of sin and grace, I will necessarily be doing it as a Protestant Christian, and I won't be sounding notes that a Catholic author might sound. Which rationality? I want to show that there are sufficient reasons for believing Christianity. Proponents, prominent disbelievers in Christianity today, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens, these guys used to be called like the four horsemen of the new atheism. Daniel Dennett has recently passed away, as well as Christopher Hitchens. So the only two left are Sam Harris and Dawkins. But anyway, Keller continues, insists that sufficient reasons do not exist for the existence of God. Dawkins, for example, says that the claim of God's existence is a scientific hypothesis that should be open to rational demonstration. He and his co-skeptics want a logical or empirical argument for God that is airtight and therefore convinces almost everyone. They won't believe in God until they get it. Is there anything wrong with that? I think so. These authors are evaluating Christian arguments by what some have called strong rationalism. Its proponents laid down what was called the verification principle, namely that no one should believe a proposition unless it can be proved rationally by logic or empirically by sense experience. What is meant by the word proved? Proof, in this view, is an argument so strong that no person whose logical faculties are operating properly would have any reason for disbelieving it. Atheists and agnostics ask for this kind of proof for God, but are not alone in holding to strong rationalism. Many Christians claim that their arguments for faith are so strong that all who reject them are simply closing their minds to the truth out of fear or stubbornness. Yes, I've definitely seen this a lot from Christians, for sure. They definitely are overly confident in the strength of their arguments, and I know this firsthand as well because I've been there, and I've said this in previous videos as well. You need to be careful when you start learning a subject because your initial confidence in what you have learned is out of proportion with your actual level of knowledge. And oftentimes after you have gained further knowledge in the subject, your confidence level drops significantly because you have realized just how much you still have to learn. And then your confidence level slowly increases as you increase in knowledge as well. So if you are just coming to apologetics or just coming on the scene and have read On Guard or have gone through the tactics book with us and things of that nature, make sure that you're staying humble, okay? Make sure that you recognize that you still have a lot to learn. Don't be overly confident. There are really good reasons to believe, and I think that there's more than enough evidence for someone to be justified and reasonable in inferring that God exists and that Jesus existed, obviously, and rose from the dead. But the arguments and the debate on that matter is still going to rage on. So you need to be humble about it. All right, so Keller continues. Despite all the books calling Christians to provide proofs for their beliefs, we won't see philosophers doing so, not even the most atheistic. The great majority think that strong rationalism is nearly impossible to defend. To begin with, it can't live up to its own standards. How could you empirically prove that no one should believe something without empirical proof? You can't, and that reveals it to be ultimately a belief. Strong rationalism also assumes that it is possible to achieve the view from nowhere, a position of almost a complete objectivity. But virtually all philosophers agree today that it is impossible. We come to every individual evaluation with all sorts of experiences and background beliefs that strongly influence our thinking and the way our reason works. It is not fair, then, to demand an argument that all rational people would have to bow to. The philosopher Thomas Nagel is an atheist, but in his book, The Last Word, he admits that he can't come to the question of God in anything like a detached way. He confesses that he has fear of religion, and he doubts that anyone can address this issue without very powerful motives for seeing the arguments go one way or the other. I am talking of the fear of religion itself. I speak from experience, being strongly subject to this fear myself. I want atheism to be true. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. I'm curious whether there is anyone who is genuinely indifferent as to whether there is a God. Anyone who, whatever his actual belief about the matter, doesn't particularly want either one of the answers to be correct. This is a very famous statement from Nagel. You'll see this a lot in Christian apologetics books. But it's usually just talking about the omission that he has with regard to being afraid of God actually existing or particular religions being true. But in this instance, we're talking about a bias. And so Nagel's admitting that he already has a bias towards atheism, like he prefers atheistic worldviews or prefers atheistic arguments. And so we need to be aware of that ourselves. If we as Christians are going to prefer Christian arguments. Okay, we're going to prefer things that make Christianity more plausible, more true, and things of that nature, and we need to be aware of that. And so when we read pro and non or anti-Christian arguments, we need to be aware of that. Okay. So Keller continues, imagine a judge who comes to a case in which one of the parties is a company in which she has a heavy financial investment. Because she has a deep desire to see the case go in a particular way, she will recuse herself from sitting in judgment on the case. Nagel is saying that when it comes to God, we are all like the judge. Depending on our experiences with religion, on our other beliefs and commitments, and on how we are living our lives, we all are deeply invested in seeing the case for God go one way or the other. The trouble is we can't recuse ourselves. Because he rejects strong rationalism, Nagel has, despite his skepticism, wonderful respect toward belief and religion. He differs markedly from the tone and stance of writers like Dawkins and Harris. The philosophical indefensibility of strong rationalism is the reason that the books by Dawkins and Dennett have been getting such surprisingly rough treatment in scholarly journals. As just one example, the Marxist scholar Terry Eagleton wrote a scathing review of Richard Dawkins's The God Delusion in the London Review of Books. Eagleton attacks both of Dawkins's naive ideas, namely that faith has no rational component, and that reason isn't based to a great degree on faith. Dawkins considers that all faith is blind faith, and that Christian and Muslim children are brought up to believe unquestioningly. Not even the dim-witted clerics who knocked me about at grammar school thought that. For mainstream Christianity, reason, argument, and honest doubt have always played an integral role in belief. Reason, to be sure, doesn't go all the way down for believers, but it doesn't for most sensitive, civilized, non-religious types either. It doesn't for anybody. Even Richard Dawkins lives more by faith than by reason. We hold many beliefs that have no unimpeachably rational justifications, but are nonetheless reasonable to entertain. If we reject strong rationalism, are we then stuck in relativism without any way to judge one set of beliefs from another? Not at all. In chapters 2 and 3, I argued that complete relativism is impossible to maintain. The approach I will take in the rest of this volume is called critical rationality. It assumes that there are some arguments that many or even most rational people will find convincing, even though there is no argument that will be persuasive to everyone regardless of a viewpoint. All right. It assumes that some systems of belief are more reasonable than others, but that all arguments are rationally avoidable in the end. That is, you can always find reason to escape it, that it is not sheer bias or stubbornness. Nevertheless, this doesn't mean that we can't evaluate beliefs, only that we should not expect conclusive proof, and to demand it is unfair. Not even scientists proceed this way. All right, so I think that we should highlight this. The approach I will take in the rest of the volumes is called critical rationality, and then highlight what he means by that. Okay? I think that is sufficient for me. I'm going to highlight that in yellow. I encourage you to do the same. So that's what he's going to be arguing for, that that you can, like I was saying at the start of this, that you can reasonably infer a particular proposition is true. All right, that's what he's going for here. That somebody with a normal rational and cognitive capacities will look at these arguments and say, and be able to reasonably infer that they are, sound and valid arguments. All right, or perspectives. Keller continues, scientists are very reluctant to ever say that a theory is proved. Even Richard Dawkins admits that Darwin's theory cannot be finally proven, that new facts may come to light which will force our successors to abandon Darwinism or modify it beyond recognition. But that doesn't mean that science can't test the theories and find some far more empirically verifiable than others. A theory is considered empirically verifiable if it organizes the evidence and explains phenomena better than any conceivable alternative theory. That is, if through testing it leads us to expect with accuracy many and varied events better than any other rival account of the same data, then it is accepted, though not in the strong rational sense proved. All right, so a lot of people, this is basically dealing with prediction and with the sciences and with how nature is constituted, especially if you take on like naturalism with the uniformity hypothesis, or that the universe has regularity to it, or that events stand in causal relations, that kind of stuff, then you can make predictions. And the better and more accurate and more precise the predictions you can make, the better the theory. All right. It looks like Keller's going to be kind of going this route. The thing is with God is that it's in many situations, it's difficult to make accurate predictions because we're dealing with a being that has free will, freedom of the will. He's omniscient, and therefore he has way more knowledge than we do. And our lack of knowledge makes it difficult to predict what a being with more knowledge than us would do. All right. Like if you've never studied nuclear power before and we were on a submarine together and there was a casualty happening, it would be very difficult for you to predict my actions. But if somebody, because you don't have the same level of knowledge that I do, but a person with similar training as me, if we're in a casualty situation, we understand the casualty together, they will be able to predict my actions, because they have the same level of knowledge. But when it comes to God, God has way more knowledge than us, and so it can be difficult to predict his actions. And God is also perfectly wise, and none of us are perfectly wise. Even though we may have certain amounts of knowledge, and some people may have the same amount of knowledge in things, a person who's wiser will be able to better apply that knowledge. And so not only do we lack knowledge with regard to making predictions on what God will do, we're not nearly as wise as God. So even if we were privy to the kind of knowledge that God has, it doesn't mean that we're able to adequately predict him because we lack the wisdom. But there are certain predictions that you will be able to make. But I personally don't think that we should. I think that predictions can be tricky and they're overrated. I personally think they're overrated. But anyway, let's see what Keller has to say. In Is There a God?, Oxford philosopher Richard Swinburne argues powerfully that belief in God can be tested and justified, but not proven in the same way. The view that there is a God, he says, leads us to expect the things we observe, that there is a universe at all, that scientific laws operate within it, that it contains human beings with a consciousness and with an indelible moral sense. The theory that there is no God, he argues, does not lead us to expect any of these things. On various forms of naturalism, it's hard to say that you could expect anything. Like I say in other videos, in order for naturalism to have any kind of predictive power, you have to assume the uniformity hypothesis. And that just means that the universe is going to behave uniformly and regularly, at least within a certain amount of time and space. But those things that's just something that you have to assume. Without it, naturalism provides zero predictive power. But just note that these predictions that Richard Swinburne talk about here are very general, not precise. He's not claiming to make any actions with regard to specific acts, like how exactly is the plan of salvation going to occur, or how exactly is God going to deliver the Israelites from Egypt, things like that, or how is he going to have the Israelites inherit the land of Canaan, All right, so Keller continues, therefore, belief in God offers a better empirical fit. It explains and accounts for what we see better than the alternative account of things. No view of God can be proven, but that does not mean that we cannot sift and weigh the grounds for various religious beliefs and find that some or even one is the most reasonable. God, the playwright. I don't want anyone to think that I am adopting critical rationality as some sort of second best, however. If the God of the Bible really does exist, critical rationality would be exactly the way we ought to approach the question of his being and existence. When a Russian cosmonaut returned from space and reported that he had not found God, C.S. Lewis responded that this was like Hamlet going into the attic of his castle looking for Shakespeare. If there is a God, he wouldn't be another object in the universe that could be put in a lab and analyzed with empirical methods. He would relate to us in the way a playwright relates to the characters in his play. We, characters, might be able to know quite a lot about the playwright, but only to the degree the author chooses to put information about himself in the play. Therefore, it is in no case could we prove God's existence as if he were an object wholly within our universe, like oxygen or hydrogen, or an island in the Pacific. Yes, this is very important. Atheists are going to routinely ask you to prove that God exists in a similar way that you can prove that Mount Everest exists. That's not how God relates to the physical reality. It'd be, and I've used this analogy as well. It'd be like Voldemort demanding that Dumbledore present to him J.K. Rowling. No, that's not how it works. Dumbledore has literally no power to manifest J.K. Rowling in the story. J.K. Rowling can manifest herself by her will and her intellect into that world and story, but it's 100% by the will of the author. Okay? And God is the author of this story. All right, so Keller continues. Lewis gives us another metaphor for knowing the truth about God when he writes that he believes in God. As I believe the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. And I personally love this quote by C.S. Lewis. And I'm just going to highlight that. Okay, and I'm going to do this little emote. Well said. Well said. Yes, I'm a big fan of that one. All right, so imagine trying to look directly at the sun in order to learn about it. You can't do it. It will burn out your retinas, ruining your capacity to take it in. As far as a far better way to learn about the existence, power, and quality of the sun is to look at the world it shows you. To recognize how it sustains everything you see, it enables you to see it. Here, then, we have a way forward. We should not try to look into the sun, as it were, demanding irrefutable proofs for God. Instead, we should look at what the sun shows us. Which account of the world has the best explanatory power to make sense of what we see in the world and in ourselves. And explanatory power is like one of the ways in which to evaluate worldviews. And we go in detail about how to do worldview evaluation in Christian Apologetics by Douglas Groheiss. So I recommend checking that out. I think it's like chapter 3 or 2 or something like that. But yeah, worldview evaluation is incredibly important. So Keller continues, we have a sense that the world is not the way it ought to be. We have a sense that we are very flawed and yet very great. We have a longing for love and beauty that nothing in this world can fulfill. We have a deep need to know meaning and purpose. Which worldview best accounts for these things? Christians do not claim that their faith gives them omniscience or absolute knowledge of reality. Only God has that. But they believe that the Christian account of things, creation, fall, redemption, and restoration, makes the most sense of the world. I ask you to put on Christianity like a pair of spectacles and look at the world with it. See what power it has to explain what we know and see. If the God of the Bible exists, he is not a man in the attic, but the playwright. That means we won't be able to find him like we would find a passive object with the powers of empirical investigation. Rather, we must find the clues to his reality that he has written into the universe, including into us. All right, so I'm going to highlight this. I highlight and yell. I'm going to say well said again. Well said. All right, so we will not find him like a passive object. All right, he's not like a passive object. We won't be able to see him. You know, one of the things about God is that he's a spirit, and that means that he's immaterial. Material objects interact in the universe, and some of them interact in the universe in a way that can be sighted. Our sight is matter-based. It's material-based, but God is immaterial. So God must manifest himself by his own power in order for us to actually see any kind of version of him. All right? Whether it be in a vision, whether it be Jesus Christ, things of that nature. God must use his power to manifest himself in a way that we can sense. If God is immaterial, then he is not something that we can sense with our physical senses. We must use some sort of other sixth sense, like the sensus divinitatis that Calvin talks about, the sense of the divine. Okay? And that is given to us by the power of God, just like all of our other senses are. Okay? So Keller continues, that is why, if God exists, we would expect to find that he appeals to our rational faculties. If we were made in his image as rational personal beings, there should be some resonance between his mind and ours. It also means that reason alone won't be enough. The playwright can only be known through personal revelation. That is why we have to take a look at what the Bible says about God and the human condition. In the Christian view, however, the ultimate evidence for the existence of God is Jesus Christ himself. If there is a God, we characters in his play have to hope that he puts some information about himself in the play. But Christians believe he did more than give us information. He wrote himself into the play as the main character in history. When Jesus was born in a manger and rose from the dead, he is the one with whom we have to do. All right. And with that, we've reached the end of the intermission. So you know what that means. That means that we get to celebrate. Yeah! Woohoo! We did it. We got the end of the intermission. Pretty short one. But, I think that there was a lot of good information in there. I think that it's well worth the effort going through it, preparing us for what we're going to be doing here, talking about the kind of Christianity that we're arguing for. People who are well-versed in Christianity will very easily recognize the kind of Christianity that Dr. Keller is talking about here, very easily. Very generic, and what sufficient reason is. Talking about critical rationality, that we can critically analyze these and these arguments and the evidences for Christianity and reasonably infer that there is a God, that Christianity is true. Not that we can know it perfectly and without fail. Pretty much nothing is like that. There's only very few things, like some logical truths and some mathematics. That's pretty much the limit. Even with regard to the beliefs regarding the external world or other minds and stuff like that, there can be doubts presented, but is it more reasonable to doubt it? Is it more reasonable to doubt the existence of the external world than to believe that the external world is a reality, is an actual bona fide feature of reality? Is it more reasonable to doubt the truth of Christianity, or is it more reasonable to believe that Christianity is true? Okay, so that's what we're going to be diving into. Right now, we haven't seen any good reasons to reject Christianity. And now we're going to see that we have good reasons to accept Christianity. All right, so thanks. Oh, yep. Don't forget to subscribe. Once again, I forget. Where even is that? There it is. All right. But yep, thanks for coming out, guys. I really appreciate you coming out. I hope to see you again next week for when we dive into Chapter 8. And Chapter 8 is going to be the clues of God. So we're going to be talking about what kind of evidences are there and things of that nature. I hope that you got something out of this intermission and that you're excited about diving into Part 2. It's funny that we're going into Part 2 of this book because we're actually, I'm filming for part 2 of Christian Apologetics by Douglas Groheitz, and those are going to be coming out in the following weeks. But yeah, sorry for hitting the mic. But yeah, thanks for coming out with me tonight, and I appreciate you guys' view. If you think that this content is valuable, please give me a thumbs up, and also share it with your friends and let people know what I do. All right. I'll talk to you guys later and see you again next week. God bless.
Hey, before you go, I hope you enjoyed today's enlightening discussion during our Christian Apologetics book study. It's always a blessing to come together to explore our faith and grow in our understanding. Your participation means the world to me, and I'm grateful for your continued support of Northeast Christian Apologetics. Remember, you can stay connected with me and access valuable resources by visiting my website at nechristianapologetics.com. There you'll find a wealth of articles, videos, and recommended reading material to deepen your knowledge of Christian apologetics. If you're as passionate as I am about equipping believers to defend their faith and engage in meaningful conversations, you can also support this ministry in various ways. One way to support this work is through patreon.com. By becoming a patron, you'll have access to exclusive content, early access to our discussions, and a chance to connect with like-minded individuals who share your passion for Christian apologetics. If Patreon is not your style, some people prefer to give me a one-time tip. And if you'd like to do that, then feel free to do so through Venmo or Cash App. But of course, there are many ways to support me. By praying for this ministry, sharing the content on social media, or simply spreading the word about what I do. Every bit of support goes a long way in helping me fulfill my mission. Once again, thank you for joining me today. Your presence and engagement enrich these discussions, and together, we're on a journey to strengthen our faith and share the good news with others. Stay tuned for more exciting book studies, thought-provoking discussions, and opportunities to grow your Christian apologetics journey. I look forward to seeing you again.